It's great to have you. Come on in and please sit down wherever you're most comfortable and we'll get started. Thank you. I appreciate you coming early. It gave me a chance to look over some of your paperwork. And just so that you get an idea of what's going to happen today. Today is what I call an intake. So even though you've put a lot of things on paper, I'd like to ask you a few more questions about what you wrote down, get you to explain things to me in your words, and from that, we're going to get a little bit into your background and what brought you to come to see me today. And before you leave, we'll set up an idea of what it is you'd like to get out of coming here.
Okay.
And set some goals up, and next week we'll take that and build upon it to develop a treatment plan. But if I don't know what brought you in here, it's really hard to know how I can best help you. And also to make sure that I'm the best person who can work with you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, great. If you don't mind giving me just a little bit of an idea, what brought you here today?
Well, I've been experiencing some ongoing depression. My mom passed away 4 years ago, a little over that. And just when you think you get through something and over something, it hits me again. And for some reason, I just can't shake it. So I'm having a real struggle with it, with the depression as a result of her death.
I hope you don't mind. My office mates like to come to visit now and again.
I love pet therapy.
Well, if they become a problem for you, just let me know and I can
Okay.
have them go on into the other room and not bother us.
Okay.
It sounds like your mom was incredibly important in your life.
Definitely.
It would really help me get an understanding of how important your mom was if you could kind of walk me through from your earliest memory through childhood and up to when you kind of left home and got out on your own, almost a timeline of your life. And I know we aren't going to be able to get into details today because we do only have about 40 minutes
Okay.
to get through everything, but it'll help me understand what the important things are for you so that we can come back and revisit those later.
Okay. The things that I remember as a child, I was the oldest.
Okay.
And so I have 2 younger brothers. And
How old are they? As far as the difference in your age.
one is 11 months younger than me, and the other is 4.5 years younger than me. And so, of course, the one that's 11 months younger than me, we grew up together, not seeing a difference. It was almost like twins because we were always together. But when my youngest brother came along, I remember when he was born, and I remember they wouldn't let us into the hospital to see mom and the baby. But my earliest memories with her were doing things with her, whether it was cooking or cleaning or folding clothes. We were always doing things together. And it was a different era. It was a different mindset. So you have to consider, the women were the homemakers, and we, had everything to do with the house and the cooking and that sort of thing, where Dad and the boys were very involved with the outdoors and doing things involving, mini bikes and fishing and that sort of thing. So the duties and the responsibilities and who we were with was really divided based on the role expectation of that era. And so, since I was the only girl, Mom and I became very, very close. I'm a talker. She was a great listener. And so I would come home every day from school, and we would go on for minimally an hour about every single thing that happened at school. And God bless her for listening. She always listened. And I never realized the importance of it and how consistent consistently she did it, even through my adulthood, until, she's gone, and then the entire family dynamic changes. So I'm skipping a big chunk, I think I had a relatively healthy childhood, emotionally healthy, with the expectations of that era. And same for the, teenage years, everything was par for the course, I would say. But Mom and I were very, very close. I think we had the normal teenage rebellion thing happening around the age of 16 until I left home and got married. I was married for 10 years and then divorced.
How old were you when you got married?
19.
And was that the first time you moved away was when you got married, or had you been on your own before that?
I had moved out and I lived with him for a year with the expectation of marriage. And so that was like a rough patch with family because they didn't approve of him. They didn't approve of living with someone before you get married. And so that was an important issue in the family and the faith. So, faith was a big role in our lives, and still is. But for a while there, it was rocky ground, to say the least.
Would you say those whole 10 years were pretty rocky?
Yeah, probably the first, the whole 10 years. And it wasn't, it was like some of it was rocky with my family, Mom and Dad specifically, and then that was toward the beginning, and then toward the end, it was rocky in my marriage. And the family support became more evident, not intrusive, but evident, that they would be there for me regardless. So that was really comforting, to say the least. And then, of course, Mom was always there for me. I have some chronic illness that I deal with.
I was
Okay.
going to ask you about that. I saw that on your health history that
Right.
there was a period of time that you did struggle.
And it's a chronic illness, and there's several aspects of that chronic illness. So, and to a degree, that can add to the depression. But when you have support from somebody really close, like your mom, who not only loves you, but you have that nurturing support, it's a different kind of support that I don't know that you get anywhere but from a mom. Even though you have, friends and other family around you, there was nobody that could, in my eyes, do what she did, because Mom was my strongest advocate.
Excuse me just a moment.
Tools
I
of
have
the
to say,
trade.
tools of the trade, and nothing is ever dull around our
I
office.
love that.
Thank you for being understanding.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
So no
But-
one is able to do what
Which she was able to do. Well, I mean, because of my illness, I was hospitalized more times than I can count. And not necessarily for surgeries, but for treatment. And they were long-term hospitalizations. And oftentimes, you're even more depressed in that environment. And you're weak. And it's kind of like when you're sick and somebody says, "Have you eaten today?" And you're like, "Gosh, I didn't even think about it." It was little things like that. So here I am hospitalized. She's my advocate. She's looking out for me. She's making sure that there's a good line of communication between me and my healthcare providers. So,
sounds like she was an incredible advocate.
incredible. I haven't found anything like like it in my life, in my personal life, even in my professional life. I don't see it a lot. And it's interesting now, as old as I am and having lived life and been in the field with healthcare for a number of years, you still don't see that kind of relationship. You'll find a doting mom, or you'll find one that ignores, or all these other different traits. But to be such a strong advocate was a real blessing. And I didn't take it for granted. It's just I didn't know how much I would miss it. So,
How old were you when you first got diagnosed?
25.
So that falls in line with the marriage, kind of in that middle part
Yes,
of marriage.
it was
right
in the
when
middle
the family
part.
was starting to come back.
Right in the middle of part of the marriage. It was when things were starting to calm down. And it was a time in my life where I thought I could have kids. You know, when I got married, we decided to wait until I was 25 and he was 30, and that would have been then. And then when I was diagnosed, the doctors put me on medication that would have spontaneously aborted a pregnancy, so or a fetus. So I couldn't get pregnant and be on the medication, so I didn't. So that kind of ruined the whole family idea.
Since you're coming more to focus on dealing with mom being gone, things were pretty good until mom got sick. When the divorce was finalized and you and mom had such a strong relationship, when did things start becoming health-wise problematic for your mom?
Wow. Mom was first diagnosed probably 20 years before anything super bad happened. Let's see.
What was her official diagnosis?
She had cancer. She had 3 different kinds of cancers in her throat. 1 in her thyroid, 2 in her throat. And it kept recurring. And the last one recurred on her carotid artery. And so at the end of her life, it wasn't seen as the end of a life. It was a surgery to remove it. And they removed it successfully, and she had a feeding tube that went down her nose. And the doctors decided that they wanted to have an abdominal feeding tube, a JPEG, put in for a longer term rest of those throat muscles and the surgical area. So she had a trach, and she was getting this feeding tube. And when she went into the procedure room to get this done, which is a very common procedure, when they took the tube out of her nose, it ruptured the carotid artery and formed a clot, and they couldn't clear the clot, so she lost oxygen to her brain, and it left her in a comatose state. And she remained in a coma for 8 months, 8.5 months, before she finally died. And I guess as anybody, could imagine, that was a really, really hard time for all of us.
During that time, then we'll get into much more detail in later sessions, but during that time, did you seek any support? You've mentioned faith being very important. Did you seek any spiritual guidance or seek any counseling at that point?
You know what? I had supportive friends. As far as seeking professional help, no. One of our very dear friends is a priest, and he would come once a week, every week, long distance, to give Mama spiritual communion and say the rosary at her bedside, which was really cool. So it was once a week, this spiritual communion with us together, which was pretty amazing that he did that for 8.5 months. But he and her felt like brother and sister. He was from Poland, she was from Slovakia, which is our heritage, and the two of them just, you would have thought they were brother and sister, the way they joked around and kidded with each other. But he really loved her, and he would travel an hour and a half every week just to get to her and make sure that she had spiritual communion, and him saying the rosary. But it wasn't something for me. It was something that we did together, but it wasn't something that I sought out for his help or anything like that. Looking back, I don't know, you know how people say they don't have time to do something? And when you hear someone say that they don't have time to do something, you know they need it. I don't have time to meditate. You must need to meditate. So I brought that up because my feeling at the time was I didn't have time, because I was working full time and traveling back and forth 3.5 hours to get to her, and spend at least 3 days a week with her till I went back and did my job, and then turn around and go back and spend that time with her. And we did this, that entire 8+ months. So that was physically draining, and it was, you kept busy enough that you didn't have time to think about a whole lot. I remember only once crying my heart out. Twice. Once when I saw her for the first time and knew I had dealt with head injury before, so I had seen her in ICU right after it happened, and I knew exactly where we were. I knew exactly where we stood, and my legs gave out, and tears just kept coming out of my eyes. It wasn't like this great sobbing, but in my heart I knew what was happening. And then again, the second time was when she had requested in her living will not to continue living like that. And I was not the first person to sign on that living will. So the first person to sign was my father, and he interpreted it differently. Is probably the kindest way to say it. So we disagreed. And one time alone, just pulled the car off on the side of the road, and I cried till I couldn't cry anymore. And those were the 2 times I cried about it.
How about when she did die? What do you remember at that point?
I was very fortunate to be with her when she died. So that was very, very, I consider it a blessing. It was very peaceful. Dad was on one side, I was on the other. It was a holy day in the church. My mom and dad have a very, strong devotion to the Blessed Mother. And this was a feast day of the Blessed Mother. And so that was the day on which she died. And so it was it was a very special day, a very special moment. And thank God it was really peaceful, but not a tear. I mean, it just, I think I felt it initially when she died, the tear. But my father reached across and put his hand on my head, and the emotion that I felt was from him, stop it. Get control of yourself. And I thought, okay, I can handle this. And then I became in charge. And so the whole process from that point was me in charge.
It sounds like your mom really filled the role of director in your family, that she made sure people had what they needed. She took care of everything.
I never heard it put that way. The role of director. Yeah, she was. She was.
She choreographed everything.
She sure did. She
And
sure
it
did.
sounds, from just hearing you explain that when she wasn't there anymore, your dad gave that control to you. Or you assumed that responsibility in the words you just used, that stop it, get a hold of yourself, and take charge.
Mhm.
Is
Even
that an
though the
accurate
words-
interpretation?
It is. Even though he didn't say the words, that was what I felt from him. And I think if he was able to say those words, he would have said those words, because that's who he is. You know, stop it, get a hold of yourself. You know, you're stronger than that. You can handle this. It's like, okay. So I did take charge.
No, let me just pronounce that one. I apologize that I didn't
That's
turn the silencer on. Let me do that now so we don't get interrupted again.
No problem. But he sure was in charge, and still is, you know, wants everybody to be in charge of their path and their way, and, you know, handle it.
So I have to ask you, have you ever gotten back to that emotion that you stifled in the last 4 years since Mom died?
Mm-mm. I really haven't. I was relieved when Mom died, because she should have died 8.5 months earlier. And I don't mean that ugly. I mean that
Not at
for
all.
her.
Very
That's
normal.
just the way it was meant to be. And I just felt it was a real falsehood living for the 8.5 months. So I struggled a lot through those 8.5 months. She was very much like the Terry Schiavo case. And I struggled so much that I actually purchased both books from Terry Schiavo's family and from her husband, because I really wanted to understand the struggle from both perspectives. It's like, okay, I read both books. It didn't help me, because I still felt the same. But have I revisited that emotion? I don't think so, because I'm thinking that she's at peace. And I think the emotion that I have felt all these years is I miss her. I can't think of a better way of saying it than I just miss her so intensely. Being recently, well, within the last year, hospitalized for a significant surgery, I realized even more so how much I missed that TLC, the advocate, the whatever you want to call it, you know, Mom being there, because she would have been there. During that time, I had to rely on friends because family wasn't there. If Mom had been alive, that never would have been the way it was. Mom would have been like, no, family helps family. family is there to help you out. Well, that's not how it was. It was friends, and I'm really grateful for that. But it was just one more instance of realizing how dramatically the family dynamic has changed. Very dramatically.
I made a note, I want to go back, and then get back to the self-care and experiencing that emotion. But you said your mom had been diagnosed 20 years before there was a complication that resulted in her death. How many years apart are you and mom?
20 years.
So about the time that mom was diagnosed is about the age that you are now. So after
Pretty-
pretty close.
Pretty close. Within about 5 years, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
It just struck me,
Mhm.
wondering if there's not subconsciously something in that, knowing that you're in the
That's
counseling
interesting,
profession
right.
as well. We are helpers who sometimes don't help ourselves very well.
No, you're
But if that's
absolutely
something
right.
that we can go into at a later day, I maybe know.
Sure.
But the other thing that I know you know because you've done this work yourself is that there's a process you've got to go through in grief. And knowing that the day that mom died, the emotion was stopped. And even though there's that intense sense of relief and thank God it's over, you've never gone back and dealt with that. And as you know, when you don't deal with it, it tends to be harbored in the body.
Good point.
And knowing that there's a process, a normal process people go through in grief.
Right.
And even though there's that intense sense of relief, we've got to go through all of the stages at some point done in some order to have a healthy resolution. And that intense emotion of missing her
Yeah.
is normal unless that intensity interferes with everyday life, which it's beginning to sound like for you, and the reason we're meeting today is that that intensity is starting to hold you back in other parts of your life.
I believe it is.
So because we're running, let me just check our time, running close to where we need to wrap it up, and I don't want to get too deep into things today because it's our first meeting, and we'll have a lot of time to work through this together, and I want you to be able to leave here feeling good enough that you're going to want to come back.
Okay.
I don't want to leave on a downer.
Okay.
What I'd like to get from you is, what is it, if you were to say 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years from now, gosh, that counseling worked. What is it that you want to get out of coming here? That you can feel that you're making steps, that you're beginning to heal enough that you're able to do this on your own?
Okay. Here's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And I think you would agree. We'll see.
Okay.
I think that my grief and or depression is being showed outwardly through disorganization.
Okay.
I've always been very organized, very on top of my game. And I think I still am when it comes to the important things,
Such as?
such as work.
Okay.
To me, that's critical. That's a must.
Mm-hmm.
But house cleaning, is that a must? No. However, it creates an environment of disorganization, and I think it feeds into depression. I think it feels good when you have things put together. It does feel good. But there's something there that's stopping me from moving forward. It almost feels like a rebellion, against mom leaving. I don't even know how that really works, but that's how I'm thinking in my head. Okay, you've left, so this is what I'm going to do. Where the heck did that come from? So I'm thinking, okay, that's one thing. Another thing is something that I haven't thought about in a really long time. And do I have to do it? I don't know. Maybe I need to. Maybe I do need to go through that emotion and actually feel it and have a good old-fashioned cry, and look at those stages a little closer to see what I've blown off that I should have paid attention to. Well, that's what I'm thinking.
One of the benefits, and when we first talked about you coming in to see me, that we had touched on, art therapy gives you an awesome opportunity where being able to experience this intense emotion, just sitting here talking about it, we can dance circles around each other.
True.
We're good at that. But being able to put things on paper and being able to express symbolically what you're feeling, and then being able to talk about, this image here that you've created,
Okay.
adds in that element of a bit of reflective distance. So you're still feeling it because you've got to feel it to get it out. But then to talk about the work here isn't talking about all of the stuff in here, just sitting here asking you to talk about it. So that might be one added layer that we can use to help you start getting some of that clutter. To use your
Okay.
analogy of disorganization, get some of that clutter outside of you and here and get it out here.
That's a good way
Because
of putting
then
it.
you can keep that clutter in my office and it becomes my responsibility. You can let it go. And one of the other things I'm wondering, you mentioned talking about your dad, and you said that mom should have been allowed to die 8.5 months before she did. But you weren't the signature first. You got to make that decision, and you didn't get there first. Which is a double-edged sword, because my guess, and I may be completely off in left field, but my guess is there's a lot of guilt because you didn't help mom the way mom always helped you. You couldn't do for her what she did for you. And there's a lot of anger. Anger at your dad,
A lot.
who is supposed to be somebody who put her needs first, but he was so caught up in his own grief that he couldn't do that.
That's really
So
true.
I think those are two sides of that coin that we need to
Heck,
consider.
yes, very much so. And it wasn't even, like I said, I think my dad misinterpreted the living will,
Mhm.
and I followed through on that by checking with the doctors.
Mhm.
She had several doctors who cared for her, as well as the nursing staff. I wanted them to read the living will to see, am I mistaken somehow? How do you interpret this? And we all interpreted it the same way, except for my dad. So he was caught up in his own stuff, and
But it doesn't negate you being able
No.
to feel the way you did about what
I felt
happened and how it happened.
I felt incredibly guilty. I sat there and talked to my mother in a coma, apologizing. I did this frequently, very frequently.
And one of the things we may want to do throughout the course of this relationship that we're going to have is you be able to say the things to your dad that you wanted to say but maybe didn't. And to do some role reversal where you can talk to your mom all the things that you were talking to her about, and then answer.
That's a good idea.
And I can easily write down what you're saying, and then I can take your place and you can become mom.
Yeah,
And try to get some of that resolution.
I like that. Because you're right, I know what Mom would say.
I had
And
a
it's-
feeling you might.
And it's one of those things that then I could carry that with me.
Yes.
And it's not like I don't already, but it would be an outward.
There's a difference between what you think, what you feel, and once you actually get the thoughts and the feelings out. And that's
Exactly.
where the art therapy gives you that, like you call it, the added layer.
Yeah,
Where it's not just you and your friends in your support network talking about it, but you're actually doing it.
right. Getting it out onto paper.
Exactly.
I mean, I really look forward to that.
Wonderful. Do you have any other things that you think are really important that I didn't touch on, that I didn't ask about today?
Nope, it brought back a lot of things that I hadn't thought about in quite a while. So, I'm really glad I talked about it. And
I'm really glad you trusted me enough to talk about it.
I really look forward to moving forward. You know, getting through it and rising above it.
Wonderful. And I won't promise you it's going to be easy.
I don't think it's gonna be. I didn't
It's
even
never
like
your-
thinking about having to cry and go through all that. I'm just not that weepy person, you know?
But allowing yourself coveted, protected time to do that,
Yeah,
to go through it, will allow you to be more of yourself
right.
outside of this environment.
Yeah. I'm good.
Think about a soda bottle. You shake it enough
Oh,
without letting a little bit out at a time. If you don't get it out, it's going to keep piling up.
yeah. And I like the analogy, get the clutter from in here out.
I have a lot of different ways that we can do that.
Okay.
But what I'm going to ask from you is honesty. If something doesn't feel right, if it's just not a good time to do something,
Okay.
as much as I'm going to put things at you, I expect you to also be able to
Okay.
be honest with me. If you're not enjoying it, knowing it's going to be work, but if it's something you're just not ready to do, I don't want to push you too hard, but I will push you.
Fair enough.
But if I push too hard, let me know and we can back up a little bit.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm not afraid to tell you where I'm at.
Good. Well, I'm really, really looking forward to working through this with you
Thank you.
and hopefully finding a way that you can continue to stay connected to Mom, but that you can get all the other things in your life back in order and get that depression improved a little bit.
Yeah, I'll always be connected to Mom.
Good.
That will not
Good.
change. We talk all the time.
Good.
So, yeah, let's get the rest of it in order and life will be even better.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you. And I look forward to, we'll head up front and set an appointment for next week.
Okay, sounds good.